And Joseph Hoyt, Dallas Morning News, joining us now to talk Cowboys here on your home of the Cowboys. And good afternoon, Joseph. How the heck are you?
I'm doing well, guys. How you doing?
We're doing outstanding. Looking forward to covering this Cowboys offseason, and that includes right now watching the Senior Bowl practices on television. Who are the guys out there down in Mobile that are going to be in play for the Cowboys at 12 and 20 or are of most interest for you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a bunch of guys did back out that I thought would be kind of some candidates there as well. But there's still some interesting guys out there. I mean, we saw Colton Hood get mocked by Daniel Jeremiah to the Cowboys at 12. And I think one thing that keeps on my mind is that they're probably going to take someone in that secondary with one or even two of those first-round picks. Whether it's Colton Hood, I'm not sure about that. But, you know, I think a guy like Chris Johnson from San Diego State, if you don't get a first-round corner, is interesting. Later on, you know, maybe an edge rusher like TJ Parker has been really impressing. The guy that keeps catching my eye is Lee Hunter. I don't think the Cowboys need any more D tackles, but that guy's just been fun to watch. And then Romello Height with some of that speed off the edge has been a little bit unique. So there's some guys still down in Mobile, even though some of the elite stars aren't out there.
Are you not a fan of Colton Hood at 12?
I'm not, because I think that if we're looking for what the Cowboys need, I think they're in a little bit of a tough position, but I think Christian Parker needs to find his Pat Surtain or his Quinyon Mitchell or Cooper DeJean in this first round. I think he needs someone with some kind of elite traits. I kind of look at Colton Hood, and I'm just not sure, at least at this point right now, if that's someone that could be that type of player for Christian Parker's scheme.
So if the Cowboys kind of in that situation, I don't know if you have Daniel Jeremiah, you remember the 11 picks that went ahead of him there, but you lost out on Reuben Bain Jr., you didn't have Caleb Downs. To your point, the top two corners are gone. So in that scenario for the Cowboys, what would you be looking to do? Would you be looking, of course, to trade if you could? And would you be more open-minded to possibly moving that pick for a proven veteran player like a Max Crosby?
Yeah, I think that those are probably the two routes. When the way that DJ's mock went, that probably would be the worst case scenario in terms of the first 11 picks going, to kind of have all those resources depleted. If I was the Cowboys in the situation, definitely look to trade out of that pick. And honestly, like, one of the things I think I would do is, knowing how many needs defensively they have, and especially some of the guys at some of those positions you could probably get on day two. I'm thinking safety, even some of these edge rushers too. One thing I think I do is trade back and then, you know, maybe try to justify taking Akeem Mesidor a little bit higher than maybe some people might, in that first round, and try to get at least an edge rusher that could be opposite of Donovan Ezeraku moving forward, especially if you don't get Jadeveon Clowney. But yeah, I think the Max Crosby thing is one of those things that doesn't have a lot of smoke, right, in terms of actually happening right now. But I feel like as the offseason goes on and maybe some things keep leaking out of Vegas, I feel like that thing's just going to pick up a little bit until we have some resolution with those two first-round picks for the Cowboys.
It was interesting, Will McClay at the Senior Bowl mentioning, obviously, hey, offense is another area we could look at. Do you think that they still could be looking at possibly taking a player, and are there any that you look at and say, hey, if this is available, maybe that's in play for the Cowboys with either of those picks in the first?
Yeah, I think one thing they've been adamant about is the idea that, hey, they're probably going to defense with those first two picks, barring a CeeDee Lamb-type player being available there. And I think a lot of people have been trying to wonder, okay, so who is that CeeDee Lamb-type player in this draft? I mean, would you take another receiver to go with CeeDee Lamb and especially have some insurance just in case George Pickens and a potential franchise tag gets messy? I don't think so, personally. I did point out that Jacoby Lane is someone that if you're looking for a George Pickens replacement in terms of spectacular catchability and that 6'3" long frame that could balance out CeeDee Lamb, that's someone that potentially you could look at from USC. But I think in terms of who that CeeDee Lamb type player could be, my mind just keeps going back to Jeremiah Love if he was there, maybe with the 20th pick. If something fell, if running backs, in terms of being devalued, just keep falling and he's just sitting there in your lap. And I know Javonte Williams is a priority, but part of me wonders if maybe that type of talent would be too good for them to pass up.
Joe, as we take a look at this coaching staff right now, especially on the defensive side of the ball, Christian Parker building this thing out, are you getting any feel for the type of guys that he's looking to poach from around the league?
Yeah, I think anytime a coach makes it to a second round of interviews, obviously, I think they have a staff kind of laid out, or at least an inkling of who they think they could get from a staff perspective. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Cowboys, I think they expect to finalize the staff, if not this weekend, early next week. I've been told that they're close to a cornerback hire. It's maybe something that could be coming down the pike there a little bit. And so I think that you're going to start seeing some interviews kind of escalate towards hiring here shortly. They obviously looked at some defensive line and linebacker candidates. I think the fact that the guy from Pittsburgh has a 3-4 candidate, kind of an edge rush coaching candidate is something that kind of intrigues me and might tell you a little bit about what Christian Parker is trying to get there.
It's Joseph Hoyt, Dallas Morning News, here with you on 105.3 The Fan. So different player types under Parker. We're looking for more outside linebacker types and then a nickel defensive back with a high priority on it. What else could you tell us about how their personnel vision might be evolving?
Yeah, I think the one thing, just talking to Jerry Jones and then talking to a lot of people, I think that the loss of Jordan Lewis was significant for them this season. And I think it even might have been more than they initially expected. That was the guy they wanted back. That's the guy they thought they were going to be able to get back. And then obviously Jacksonville came in and swooped with a really high offer. I think replacing Jordan Lewis and finding that Cooper DeJean type guy is something that's going to be an essential priority for the Cowboys this year. It's kind of one of the reasons why, if we talk about 12 and 20, what they might do in the draft, a guy like Avion Terrell from Clemson is someone that kind of just keeps catching my eyes as kind of a feisty nickel-type corner that could maybe be that Jordan Lewis-type replacement for Christian Parker as they kind of build that thing around. And then, I think maybe a little bit of more juice on the edge in terms of a 3-4 edge rusher, someone with a little bit more speed. The guy that I've always been really a big fan of in terms of potential trade targets too, and our friend John Owning has been trumpeting this guy for a long time, is Alex Herbig. I was talking to a Steelers reporter over at the Shrine Bowl just about them and what they think might happen, and that's a lot of edge rushers they've got and a lot of payment that they have allocated if they're going to try and sign Nick Herbig to a long-term role, and especially as someone who probably wants more snap counts than being a pitch count type guy. If they make that hire for their 3-4 outside linebackers coach, I think Pittsburgh would be one of the first people I call and see if Mike McCarthy's willing to let him go.
How do you see this George Pickens situation playing out, Joe?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be drama-free, to be honest with you. I think it's going to be pretty status quo for what the Cowboys have had recently in terms of, hey, there's going to be, I think there will be a franchise tag. I think that's the plan right now. And then I think if that happens, you're wondering if George Pickens becomes a little bit disgruntled. And I think that would be natural, just considering everything we know about the franchise tag inherently with every player, especially one trying to cash in, but also George Pickens' past. Everything in Dallas with George Pickens has been better than hoped. It's been kumbaya. Everything's been great. But I wonder what happens when the franchise tag becomes a leverage point and a sticking point in contract negotiations. And I fully expect if the franchise tag's applied that we're, sitting there on the first day of training camp asking Jerry Jones about, potentially George Pickens missing training camp and what that could do. And I think it's a little bit different, too, from what we've seen from like a Micah Parsons type holdout situation. Obviously, he never played for the Cowboys last year, but CeeDee Lamb was affected. That's one thing he's been adamant about. By missing training camp the year before, there was a catch-up period. There was a little bit of a rush that him and Dak Prescott had to kind of going into that season. And I think with George Pickens and the way that this offense needs to thrive next season, that's something that you got to factor in terms of your negotiating where you might go from a ceiling perspective.
Hey, Joe, I have the utmost respect for your eye for the evaluation as doing your work for this college draft and stuff like that. I really like the perspectives you give. Is there anybody right now in the media that we're getting wrong, that player-wise, that you kind of like, man, I'm liking this guy a lot better than everybody else is, or is there somebody that we're not getting right that you're agreeing with, or you're saying, we're really wrong about that guy?
I don't think, one, I appreciate that, Brian. It means a lot. And two, I don't know if I'm there yet in terms of, feeling what everyone else is feeling on a certain guy. One guy I really like, just from a potential standpoint, is Anthony Hill at Texas. And maybe I'm a little biased just because I saw him at
with you on this one. Yeah, keep going. You're doing the right things.
I just think in terms of speed and in terms of playmaking ability, like this is just someone I think that, maybe this year didn't go as planned, but I also think that maybe some things factored into that, right? And so I think that especially, we talked about the Cowboys maybe trading back.
Right.
I mean, in my opinion, if you trade back, get 2 day 2 picks, and you come away with a guy like Dylan Thieneman at safety and Anthony Hill at linebacker, I think that might be doing a lot better than just the one guy you might get at 20, in my opinion.
That'd be fun. That would be a lot of fun. Joe, what was your, in being there at the Shrine Bowl covering it, how this all evolved with Aaron White Cotton, and now he's over in Tennessee as the defensive coordinator. Was that still a part of the staff that the Cowboys really would have liked to keep around, or was there maybe a disconnect there with Christian Parker potentially?
It's interesting because I think one of the things I talked about when they first hired Christian Parker was this idea of continuity being so important on the defensive line. The one thing I heard from so many people, including players, was, hey, imagine what a full offseason of Kenny Clark, Osa Odighizuwa, and Quinnen Williams will do for next season. And I kind of this was me kind of putting 2 and 2 together. I thought they might want to keep some continuity with coaching staff there too. And so that's one of the things I trumpeted. And then you started talking to some people, and it kind of seemed, at least by the Shrine Bowl, that his departure was expected from the Cowboys, and that things were a little bit okay in terms of him potentially moving on. One of the things he told Calvin Watkins last night was that he interviewed with Christian Parker, and they kind of decided just to go their separate ways. And ultimately, I think he found a really good fit with Tennessee. Robert Saleh and him had a lot of success in New York in terms of building that defensive line. I think it's a really good fit for him, and maybe just best of both worlds for both sides to move on.
It's Joseph Hoyt of the Dallas Morning News talking Cowboys football with him. Okay, kind of to the point about Jordan Lewis becoming too expensive for the Cowboys last year, and George Pickens. What is your read on how much they're going to be able to increase, their targeted amount of money? It seems like the top end of what they want to spend on defense might be, Kenneth Murray, $7 million. Can we push to 10 or 15 mil for some impact players this year if you do, give the contract to Pickens?
Yeah, I think that's the big question going into free agency. We've heard all in being the trademark phrase a couple of years ago. This year, obviously, that's bust the budget. And I do think in terms of what they got to do offensively in bringing back Javonte Williams and George Pickens, that's going to be a huge allocation of resources. And I'm wondering what they do defensively, what that ceiling is, to your point, Gavin. I think one guy that might test their ceiling, and this is me just putting 2 together and kind of speculating. I think the idea of bringing in a guy like Nakobe Dean who could help teach Christian Parker's system and kind of give something reliable, I think that would be exciting for them. And that's a guy that would push that ceiling. That's a guy that I don't think you're getting for $10 million a year, to be honest. I think Spotrac has his annual evaluation probably at $14 to $15 million. That's where my mind goes. But also maybe there's a cheaper option. Alex Singleton is a guy that also was with Christian Parker in Denver, and obviously different positions than Christian Parker's forte, but that's a guy you could get cheaper. Or maybe DeMario Davis is someone that's going to hit the market that you could bring in to be a veteran presence at the inside linebacker position. So my gut tells me they won't push that ceiling too much, to be honest with you. But I do think that there's at least some interesting candidates that make that storyline worth following this offseason.
What was your biggest takeaway from Steven and Will talking yesterday?
Oh, man, I wish I was there. I got snowed in. couldn't head out to Mobile. I was really bummed about that. That was my first impression. But no, the second thing I think is, I think it's where their mind went in terms of who are these pillars on their defense. I think DeMarvion Overshown is someone they still have high hopes for being a consistent player, and obviously the injury history is something that is a factor. I do think the fact that they mentioned Deron Bland and the fact that Christian Parker said he was really looking forward to working with Savone Revel, I think that's going to be fascinating. And Donovan Azaraki is someone they think high of. But in terms of what they're going to do defensively, and, Gavin, this kind of goes back to the bust the budget idea on defense. They have a lot of changes they need to make. They have a lot of things they need to do. You're looking at either 6, maybe even 7 new starters on that defense. You got to go find that fit Christian Parker's system. So I think that's probably my interesting takeaway. I'm curious to see what Christian Parker and Savone Revel could do with a full offseason together too.
What is your official insider scouting report out of Eugene on the Oregon Ducks tight end Kenyon Sadiq? And they have good tight ends, but do they have a game-breaking tight end? I wonder how the Cowboys would be looking at that internally. Like if we get wiped out of defensive guys, and maybe there isn't a tackle there, and we don't need a wide receiver. Could tight end be something that could be of interest as that first round plays out? And should that be Sadiq? Is he going to be a star?
I think recently I saw that they're doing a live action of He-Man, and I was a little surprised that Kenyon Sadiq was not the guy casting it because he is an absolute freak. It's one of those guys that if you picture the perfect tight end prospect, I think Kenyon Sadiq would be that in terms of his body. A little less production than I thought he would have this season in Eugene, but obviously a couple of factors there, including an injury, were part of that. Whether or not you can fit with the Cowboys, it's funny when you mentioned earlier, who the CeeDee Lamb type guy might be, that could kind of get them thinking offense. I was thinking Jeremiah Love, but my second one was, what if Kenyon Sadiq is there a little bit later than people expected, and you could build Jake Ferguson, Kenyon Sadiq, and Brevin Spanford as a trio to kind of move into the future with at tight end. And I think that would do a lot, not only from the passing game, but Brian Schottenheimer wants to run the ball. And if you have a two tight end set specifically with Brevin Spanford and Kenyon Sadiq that you can run play action off of, I think that would give a lot of problems to the Cowboys opposing defenses. I don't expect it to happen, but I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Well, Joey, I was about to say, if you could get me some tape of Sadiq rushing the passer, I'd really appreciate that. Maybe go back and get some of that USC film, something like that. Maybe Washington, we can get some Sadiq rushing the passer, because I think there would be an absolute riot if that were to happen. But you said it probably won't. But I don't think it's a bad fallback candidate to begin with. I really don't. It's a really good player.
Yeah, put him at edge. I mean, why not?
Yeah, why not?
I think, well, let's get them two decided going with Kenyon Sadiq. I'm a fan.
Well, hey, Joe, what do you think of the Belichick stuff from yesterday and him not being a first ballot Hall of Famer, somebody who's a writer and is in those circles with some of the other maybe older crusties that you've gotten to know and rub elbows with over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking. And I think that, I think the shock was the first reaction, but then you start to wonder, okay, what else played into this? And, I grew up in San Mateo, California, where Barry Bonds, went to high school and, the Balco things. And that obviously the politics play a part in Hall of Fame resumes, right? And part of me wondered if maybe, he rubs people the wrong way in certain regards, or if the North Carolina stuff has maybe played a part in it. But I think the second thought after that is, this is a Hall of Fame NFL head coach and one of the best NFL head coaches of all time. And I know he had Tom Brady at his disposal, but it was shocking to not see him make it to the Hall of Fame, frankly.
You're the man, Joe. Thanks for your time. Good luck getting out there, and we'll be looking to catch up with you soon. Talk some Cowboys football.
Sounds good, fellas. Take care.